Emma? Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Barbara Anderson. I'm very grateful, Al-Anon. I celebrate my anniversary next Sunday, I think it is, March 19th, 1984, so I'll be 38. My sponsor is Linda B. of Cabo San Lucas and St. Paul, Minnesota. And I have a home group. My home group is the J-Town, currently the J-Town Zoom group in Kentucky. I am so grateful to be here. I want to be sure that I take the opportunity to thank Lee for inviting Dick and I to be here and arranging things for us. I want to thank Leslie, who's been a great host, and we got to know each other on several phone calls and have some similar connections in service. Thank Harry and all his crew, and I know I'm going to leave somebody out. I think my friend Sulita, I'm so glad that she was able to come. Sulita came to visit me in Kentucky and said, there's some weird stuff on the plane when I came here. People were like cleaning the seats or something, and she got home and COVID started like 2 days after she got home. And we hadn't seen each other since then, so I was very grateful she could come. And there's so many of you here. I was kind of overwhelmed with how many people that I knew here, and I have missed Georgia, so I'm grateful to be here. All the little things that this committee does are just important. We have this cool little bag with snacks in it, and we've had we were part of the drawing last night. Now, I had one of those kind of grab bags. You have no idea what's going to be in there, and there was an umbrella and 2 tennis balls that were dead. So maybe our dog will enjoy playing with them. But the most exciting thing in there was a disco mirror ball. And I have to admit that from Apple Music, I played "Staying Alive" last night, and Dick wasn't home yet, but he went to Waffle House. Anyway, I'm kind of thinking about mounting it over the bed when I get home, though. Anyway, it's so good to see everybody. And the other thing, I forgot to say, and the other thing is, I have never, and I have to say never, seen anybody get so excited about peanut butter. We're having a lot of fun, and thanks to Nancy and her display over here, I recognized and found out that it was 2013 that Dick and I spoke here before, so we're so grateful to be here back here with y'all for the 25th anniversary. I like to start my talk by sharing with you my 12 steps before Al-Anon. Number 1, I admitted that I was powerful over others and that your lives were certainly unmanageable. 2, came to believe that I was the power that could restore you to sanity. 3, made a decision that you should turn your will and life over to the care of me. 4, made a searching and fear-filled inventory of everyone that I knew and found them lacking. 5, admitted to God, myself, and anyone that would listen the exact nature of your wrongs. 6, identified your defects of character and became willing to assist you in removing all of them. 7, humbly, assisted you in removing your defects of character, except when to do so would cause me harm. 8, made a list of everyone that had harmed me and vowed to get even with them all. 9, waited and waited and waited and waited for everyone to make direct amends to me. 10, continue to take your inventory, and when you were wrong, promptly pointed it out. 11, sought through martyrdom, mothering, managing, and manipulating to improve your conscious contact with me, asking only that you read my mind and carry out my wishes. And 12, having had a complete emotional, physical, and spiritual breakdown as a result of this type of living, I tried to drag all those I loved down with me and get sympathy and pity from all that would listen. But what's sad, that was kind of who I was. I kind of came to Al-Anon and then discovered my story. I was dating a recovering alcoholic, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. But he said he would never marry anybody unless they went to Al-Anon. And now he didn't say you have to go, but he said he never married anybody that was in Al-Anon. So I went to Al-Anon to manipulate him into marrying me, and it did work. But what I did is, what happened for me is I actually discovered who I was and why many of the things in my family were the way they were. Because you see, I think I have alcoholism. It's a mirror version of it, but I believe Al-Anon, suffer as much from alcoholism as alcoholics do. We just have a different form of it. When I came into Al-Anon, I was physically ill. I had stomach and intestinal problems. I had asthma. I had an active eating disorder. I was suicidal half the time, but I would never have told you that. And I was spiritually bankrupt. But I always had a smile on my face. I was there to help anybody who needed it. And I was kind of like an empty cylinder that was a mirror and would reflect back to you what you wanted to see. If you were sad, I was sad. If you were happy, I would be happy. If you were grieving, I'd grieve along with you. If you wanted to celebrate, I would celebrate with you. I really didn't even know I had my own emotions. And my parents did, they didn't want to have to deal with any negative feelings. And early on in my family, I learned that, being sad or being angry or grieving or any of those kind of things just weren't okay. And so I was taught how to stuff my feelings. Anyway, when Dick and I first went out, he asked me if I had any alcoholism in my family, and I told him no. And you'll recognize in just a few minutes how crazy that was. My father's father was an alcoholic. My father was the baby of 14 kids, and over half of them were alcoholic. And when my dad was 7 years old, his father tried to commit suicide and ended up in the North Carolina State Mental Institution as a result of his alcoholism. And he died there 5 years later. My dad was then 12, and he snuck into the funeral home to see his dad one last time. And what he saw was a body with both arms and both legs broken. And I did some research, and I discovered that at that time, they were trying to do some experiments on alcoholics that were there in the institutions, and they tried to see if by breaking a limb, they could shock alcoholism out of him, and that's what happened to my grandfather. Now, my dad lived in Rockingham, North Carolina, and I discovered, actually, Dick and I went to speak up in Maryland, and we stopped at Gettysburg on the way back, and then we came on to Mount Airy, North Carolina, and we stopped and we spent the night at Andy Griffith's childhood home, which I think was managed by the Hampton Inn or something, I don't remember. And in the morning, Goober comes over with the paper and a cup of coffee in the squad car, and Dick and I went downtown, and we ate at the Snappy Lunch, and then we went over to this museum, and we'd heard they had a nice collection of Andy Griffith stuff. But as we were going in, there was a sign that said "The Tragedy of the Allen Women," and my maiden name was Allen. He said, "We have to be sure and go see this too." And I discovered that day that my ancestors perpetrated the worst courthouse shooting of all times, and it was over alcohol and moonshine, and it was kind of like Romeo and Juliet, Hatfield and McCoy's. There was a girl from one family that fell in love with a guy from the other family, and somehow this courthouse battle happened over that relationship. So I think tracking back, I didn't go any further than that. I think that was far enough in my ancestry. But, my family were from Rockingham, and if you happen to know, moonshine running was the originator of NASCAR, and NASCAR started in Rockingham. So I'd like to say that my family invented NASCAR. My mother's father was also alcoholic, and he came from a big family, but he came from a family with a lot of money, and I think I'm glad I didn't know this early in my life. My mother was very, very frugal. But her father was told by his father that he gave all the kids in the family some money and said, make something of it, and you get some more. Make nothing of it, you get written out of the will. And so my grandfather went through all the money and was written out of the will. And actually, when he died, he was buried in a pauper's grave. I think they later moved him. But I didn't know anything about that part of the family at all when I was growing up. I actually found out a lot about it when my uncle got sober. But my grandmother was the alcoholic that I knew most growing up. And my mom and dad were two adult children of alcoholics. They had no real idea how to parent. But, whenever my dad worked a lot, he worked the graveyard shift a lot, or on the weekends he worked for the railroad. And most every weekend I spent at my grandmother's. And the first thing that grandmother and I did every Saturday morning was to go to the liquor store. And my grandmother didn't just go to one, she went to 3. And she told me she was bargain shopping, but I think she just didn't even want the liquor store owners to know how much alcohol she bought a week. So, we would do the bar, and it was probably against the law back then, too, but I have wonderful memories of liquor stores. They would take me in, and the liquor store owner would have a toy or some candy or something to drink and talk to me while my grandmother did her shopping. So, obviously, she was a very good patron. Then, with the liquor in the trunk, we would be off on some kind of adventure. My grandma, in later years, I figured out that whatever we did was a place she could get alcohol. We would go to one of those lovely little tea houses, Mary Mac's, or there used to be actually one in downtown Riches, and there were all these little lovely tea houses, and where she could get her martinis and I could get my Shirley Temples. Or we would go to the Symphony, where they had an open bar. We'd go to see a traveling Broadway show where they could have an open bar. We'd go to a gallery open where they had an open bar. We would go to Piedmont Park to some kind of festival there where they had a beer garden. One weekend I showed up and my grandmother had decided that she wanted to buy me a harp. And I didn't understand that, but, I went with her and we went to all these music stores. And I have no idea what she found in the music stores, but the next weekend she said, no, I think I've changed my mind. I want you to play the accordion. And so we went around to the music stores again, and my grandmother loved Lawrence Welk. I kind of thought maybe I was actually going to get accordion, but I didn't get accordion or a harp. But she found something there. Anyway, so we would get back home after whatever the adventure was, and we'd unpack the trunk of liquor. And I would settle down for my cheese toast, and the only thing I ever really remember eating at my grandmother's house was cheese toast. And she would settle down with her martinis, and we would settle down to watch Lawrence Welk. And if you don't know who Lawrence Welk is, you can Google him. And but it does show my age. And somewhere in the middle of the bubbles and the all the music, grandmother would fall asleep. Now today I know she passed out, but many a Saturday night I would be tired or hungry or scared or sick, and I wouldn't have anybody take care of me. I didn't know that there was anything unusual about that. So occasionally grandmother would wake back up, and then she would want to go out to the honky-tonks, and these were not the ladies' establishments. These were the dirt or concrete or sawdust floored places, and I would try to curl up in a ball underneath the table with the wet beer and try to sleep while my grandmother partied above me. But when Dick asked me if I had any alcoholism in my family, I told him no. And so I didn't know that had anything to do with alcoholism. I knew there was something unusual about my grandmother. And pretty soon, whenever I could find a reason to go somewhere else on the weekend, I did. And I also made some friends in my grandmother's neighborhood so I could go stay with a friend there, if I could, not to be there with grandmother. I made very good grades in school. My parents told me that I wouldn't be able to go to college unless I had a scholarship. And I kind of called myself socially anorexic, for lack of a better term. I had 6 dates in all of high school. I made very good grades, and I went off to college. And then when I went off to college, I decided that I wasn't going to be determined I had to graduate first or second in my class there. I wanted to date or something, and so pretty soon after that, there was a guy that asked me to go out with him, and he asked me to go to church with him, which was probably about the best thing for him to do at the time. And we went to church. On the way back, he kind of pulled over on the side of the road, and we were talking. And he had ended up at the school, which was a small church sponsored school in Rome. And he was telling me the story about how he had caught his dad in the act of adultery with another woman, and his mother had sent him to this particular school to hide him from his father because he was going to have to testify in the divorce hearing, and he started to cry. And I was automatically in love. It was just about that quick. And here was a man who was sensitive with his emotions. He was willing to share them with me, and he needed somebody. And so I was, now what he didn't tell me for a long time, and I actually had some friends try to warn me, because he was in the school of music with me. I don't know if that had anything to do with it or not, but he was also gay. And he just didn't, his family wanted him to have a good wife. I don't know, I probably could have been married to a gay guy somewhere along the line if things had gone differently. He was also probably had a problem with alcohol. I'm not sure. He drank a lot, and I think somebody mentioned Quaaludes. It was you, James. And he would take one of those every now and then. I didn't know that was unusual. Anyway, I finished college, and I had decided by then I was going to go to seminary. There was Joan of Arc, and there was Barbara the Baptist, and I went off to seminary. And the first semester at seminary, I was playing the piano and leading children's choir at this particular church. And on a Sunday night, there was a man who came in, and he asked if he could speak to the congregation for a few minutes. And he told a little bit about his story in AA, and that he felt like he owed the church amends. He called them hypocrites. He just wanted to make amends. He wanted to stick around and be a volunteer or whatever. And I have never seen anybody before or since ever make amends to in the church. But that man today is my husband, and y'all will hear from him later today. He asked me during that time to go out, he says, but I don't remember it. And I told him no, because I was going out with somebody in the church who ended up to be gay. But anyway, I don't know. I was a music major, and there were a lot of guys in the music school trying to hide. So anyway, I finished seminary, and there's a lot more to tell, but I'll kind of come back to it. And I was in Atlanta at Lenox, if y'all know Lenox, some of you will. And this man came up to me and said, I know you from somewhere. And I said, I didn't think anybody ever actually used that line. And we tried to figure out where we had met, and we originally or eventually recognized that it was at this church. And he then tried to convince me that I would give him my phone number, and I just wasn't so sure about it, but I finally did. At the time, I thought it was just to get rid of him. And I don't know, it was just one of those, nobody had ever approached me like that before. And I don't know how many times Dick called me and asked me out before I said yes. I have no idea why I gave him such a hard time. I do love Pride and Prejudice. I don't know if it had anything to do with me seeing him as Mr. Darcy or something. Anyway, I eventually agreed to go out with him, and the first date we went to this beautiful 5-star restaurant. He told me all his AA story again. Then we went to see a Broadway show, and the second date, we went to an equally nice restaurant, and we went to see a movie. And the third date, we went to this outdoor amphitheater. And Dick had a catered dinner brought in, and we were there to hear Johnny Mathis. And I was a little overwhelmed, and somewhere in the evening, Dick told me about this prayer that he had prayed back in those times when he had first met me, when I was first in seminary. He'd seen me up in the choir, one particular Sunday, and he prayed this very eloquent prayer, God, she do. Because he'd been sober that a magic time, a year and a half, or whatever it is that you have to be before you can go out with anybody, and his sponsor told him he could date. And I turned him down. I don't remember it. I just don't remember it. But because I was dating a guy in the church that was gay. But anyway, but here he was pouring his heart out to me, and I just wasn't sure. I was scared to death, I think, but I told him I wasn't even sure I was attracted to him. So we didn't date for a while, and during that time, I kind of went back through all the gay guys I'd gone out with. A lot of them were gay. Some of them were out by then. And then the ones that my parents hated, were probably, my parents would still hate them. They were a little irritating. And I don't know, I recognized I made a mistake, and I called Dick and asked him, if he wanted to go out again. And so we started going out in February of '84, and by October we got married. But there were some things that happened in the meantime. The first time we went off for the weekend, we went to Charleston, and he rented the whole second floor of the Battery Carriage House. It was this beautiful, place with a living room area with a grand piano and a dining room, and there was the bedroom. But unfortunately, it was also the weekend of the Final Four, and Kentucky basketball was in there. And so really all he wanted to do was watch basketball all weekend. And we were off on a romantic weekend. I just didn't understand this. And by the time we got back home, I decided maybe there is something to that Al-Anon thing, and I went to a meeting. Now, I went to, the thing I remember about my first Al-Anon meeting is, including me, there were 4 women named Barbara there. It was just kind of weird, and but I left there thinking, these women really need me. I could really help them, and I didn't recognize again that there was any alcoholism in my family, and I didn't. He was sober, so I didn't get why I needed to go, and so I had my period of Cliff Notes version of Al-Anon. If anybody's done a Cliff Notes version of the program, you know that you just kind of. I was trying to learn all the buzzwords. I was doing independent study on the steps. I was working on myself. And, if you'll remember, alcoholism, the ism is I sponsor myself. It's not very smart. And so I was, doing that. But I had been convinced. He did suggest that I get a sponsor. And he suggested who to get, and there was no way I was going to pick who he suggested. And so I went to my next meeting, and I had already worked in independent study through my 4th step by then, which is not the way to do it. And the woman who led the discussion sounded like, she might have her act together. And so I asked her after the meeting if she would be my sponsor. And she said, well, where are you in the steps? And I said, well, work through 4. And she said, do you have it with you? And I said, sure. And she said, give it to me tonight, and I'll read it and call you later and tell you what I think. Now, this is not the way to do a 5th step if you're new. But this is what she did. So she went home and she read it, and she called me, I don't think it was more than an hour, and she said, run. And I said, what? She said, run. You still can get out. If you're not married, your life is going to be a living hell if you marry this alcoholic, and you don't have to do it. And she said, in fact, my husband's in the other room having sex with another woman. And I thought, I don't think I picked the right sponsor. I went back to that meeting one more time, really to get my 4th step back from her. And she entered the brownout zone. Alcoholics have blackouts. I have brownouts. There's just places whenever something's a little traumatic, my brain just erases part of something. And I don't remember the woman's name. I don't remember what she looks like. I've said that many, many times, and I've never had a woman run down and say, "Oh, it was me." And so I don't know who it was. But anyway, I found a sponsor, that I thought would, help me. And Dick and I got married. And when we got married, the church was kind of divided into thirds. There was a third of them that were, I'd worked with in Baptist land. And, there were lots of ministers and college presidents because of a job I'd had and all kinds of things. And then there was about a third of the people that were in 12-step programs. Dick knew a lot of people in AA. And the other third were family members, mine and his, and we had alcohol at the wedding for family members. And I'm not sure who it bothered more, the Baptist or the members of AA, but I'm pretty sure it was a Baptist. And so we went off on our honeymoon, and, we had this wonderful time. And, I really thought I watched way too many romances. I probably still do. Dick hates me watching Hallmark all the time, but it sometimes watching something positive is better than other stuff. But anyway, I really thought it was like happily ever after, and Dick's family recreationally fights. And it'll start like over white or wheat bread for dinner or something like that. It'll morph into an hour-and-a-half argument, and it flows through so many topics. I usually just leave the room now. But anyway, I ended up keeping a bag packed for the first 2 or 3 years we were married. And we'd have a little argument, and I'd think the marriage was over, and I would go to the closet. I would dramatically get my bag out. I'd tell him that, I was going, and he said, okay. I said, "You don't understand, I'm going to go." And he said, "I got it." And so I would walk to the door, and I'd grab the door, and I'd start opening, and I look back, and I said, "I really mean it." And he'd say, "I understand, bye." And then I'd walk out the door, and I'd stick my head back in and say, "I really am going." And he said, "Okay, see you later." And so I walked down the stairs, I'd get in the car, and in my fantasy, he would run down the stairs, and we'd say, "Oh, beloved, don't go." Well, he never did that. And he'd probably been to more Al-Anon meetings than I had by then. He knew everything Al-Anons try to manipulate somebody, and nothing I tried ever worked. I'm very grateful to see all of you here, because there's something about hearing an Al-Anon speaker. Maybe it'll help you recognize effects of family or whatever. I don't know, but he had certainly recognized it, and nothing that did work. Anyway, I'd drive around for a while. Occasionally, I would think about going to see my mom and dad. But I didn't want them to think we had problems in our marriage. And so, I'd drive around about, 2-3 hours later, I'd come back and with my bag in hand. I never really stayed away for a night. And I'd come back in the house and say hi, and he said, "Good to see you." And I put my bag up. Now, I thought, because Dick was the alcoholic, that he was the one that was sick. No. Dick is the founder of Al-Anon. It's for families that have somebody that live with them that need to work an Al-Anon program. And anyway, eventually, Dick and I went to the International Convention in Montreal in 1985. And we got on the plane, and it was an L-1011, which they don't fly anymore. Had 5 seats in the middle and 2 on each of the outsides. And a big plane, lots of people on it. And somewhere along the line, somebody made an announcement, were there any friends of Bill W. on board? And well over half the people on the plane raised their hand. And Dick was so excited, I think he was kind of like witnessing what it might have been like for him to be table hopping when he was drinking. He was just bouncing all over the plane, talking to people, and I never felt more like I didn't fit in. I was still auditing Al-Anon. I was, still in Cliff Notes version. I wasn't committed. So we got there, and if you've been to an international, maybe you went to the one in Atlanta, people are running across the road to give you a hug. It's so good to see you. And people are, some book, and they're getting people to sign it. And I just didn't get it. And we got back to the room that night, and I went into the bathroom, and I came out with a razor in my hand and said, I think I'm just going to kill myself. And honestly, on one level, I felt that way. But, Dick speaking later, it was one of those pink Big Daisy razors, and I had been using it for about a month to shave my legs. So I wasn't going to hurt myself much. And so that's the reaction he had. He laughed, And the only one of us that's ever tried to hit the other one was, I think I tried to punch him in the gut or something. I don't think I hurt him at all. And I just broke. I started crying, sobbing. And he said, honey, if there's ever a time for you to join Al-Anon for you, it might be here. You're at the International Convention. And not only was it Al-Anon, was it AA's International, it was Al-Anon's first International. The next morning was the opening meeting. And I went to the first opening meeting of Al-Anon's International for me. And guess who the speaker was? It was Lois Wilson herself. So when I got ready to hear the words of Al-Anon for the first time, it was Lois herself that brought it to me. And I still get goosebumps every time I think about what a gift that was. She talked about our big 3 A's, Al-Anon, Alcoholics Anonymous, and Alateen, and how we were supposed to be a family. And I'm so grateful to see family recovery here. My experience is that family recovery is getting farther and farther apart, that Al-Anon and Alcoholics Anonymous are just not as close as they used to be. And I hope that there's something that we can do about that, because I think we get better together. We separate if we aren't both working the program together. So anyway, then she also talked about the fact that this was a spiritual program. There's not a spiritual side of the program. It was a spiritual program. It was a transforming way of life, and we never, ever had to be the same again. And I heard that. And by the time I had left that meeting, I'd finally taken the first step. It'd been about a year and a half or so since I'd started going to meetings. And I got to meet Lois. I was determined, after hearing her and after meeting so much, I got to meet her. Dick and I, we went along. He was very active in service. He was very active he was on the 12-step list. We lived in Inman Park, which is near downtown Atlanta, and he would get these calls, somebody at a bus station or something, and, he would bring these, drunks home, and they would sleep in the back bedroom, and so I had met Lois now. I had kind of envisioned myself as kind of being like Lois. I was helping take care of all these alcoholics, and until one night we had a knock on the front door, and there was one of these guys, and he was at the front door. He said, I think I've killed somebody. And Dick said, don't call the police yet. Just hold on. Let me go see what's going on. And his name was Emmanuel, and he'd been in our front yard, and he was stabbing a tree with a butter knife. So he didn't hurt anybody. But Dick decided that maybe it might be a better idea for a little while for him to take himself off of the 12-step list. Because I was a little traumatized by it. Anyway, I was a mess. The second and third step were very difficult for me to take, although I thought I had taken them. See, I went to seminary, so I thought, I know everything there's to know about God, and I just, sure, I'll follow God, I'll make a decision. The reality is so much had happened to me that I didn't think God loved me. I didn't think that, that anything would happen if I turned my life over to God. I loved AA speaker meetings from the beginning. I really tried to become an AA member. I got drunk, I think, twice around Dick. He just laughed at me because I was silly. And it didn't work, so I couldn't qualify for AA. But I was struggling with this, and I had a sponsor. She told me she wanted me to keep a God journal and write down in it anything that happened in my life that was beyond human understanding. Today, when I have somebody struggling, I ask them to look for it daily. Look for that God gift they get every day. And there's always something, you know. It might, several days, you know, about a week ago, it was the first daffodil of spring in my front yard. You know, sometimes it's money to pay a bill when I have no idea how it's going to happen. You know, the other day, Thursday, I got to meet a woman who I've been sponsoring that I met on Zoom, and I never met her face to face. And we had dinner with her in Atlanta. Friday night, it was seeing my friend Silita, you know, after so much time. And all of your faces, too. I've had a lot of gifts this weekend. So sometime I put a lot down, but I just started keeping that God journal. And during that period of time, you know, having the money to pay a bill was a big deal. She also told me she wanted me to do a fourth and fifth step of my relationship with God and the church. And see, I see sometimes the steps hold hands with each other, and sometimes there's something in the one before it or the one after it that we have to do to really work through it. And so I said I would do it. And, you know, all the wonderful memories I had of childhood, of God is love and Jesus loved me. I mean, all these little things I had remembered from back then. But I remembered all these things that had happened in the church. And I'm not going to share all of them with you, but I'm going to share one of them. I had an interview down in Lower Alabama, and I'm not sure exactly where it was. I think it was somewhere around Montgomery, but I don't really remember. It went into the brownout zone, okay? Name of the church, city, whatever's gone. But I went down from Louisville. I was living at Louisville at the time because that's where I went to seminary. And I went down there and I walked into a fellowship hall. It seemed like it was a big fellowship hall. It was at least half this big. And there was a big circle of chairs and people were in them. And there was one in the middle, and they said, "Please sit in the chair, please." So I was sitting in the middle of this big circle. And the man that was immediately across from me said, "We just wanted to see what someone like you, a woman, that would have the audacity to apply for this job would look like. That's all." Now, I'd driven from Louisville, Kentucky, all the way to Lower Alabama for that. And they had told me they were going to pay my expenses, and I didn't have the money to get home. And it was late. I had to stay in a hotel. And I said, "Well, I hope you're going to pay my expenses." That's what came out of my mouth. I didn't really know what to say. I've thought of a whole lot of things since then. But there was a man from this part of the circle that threw some money on the floor. And I picked the money up, and I walked out of the circle, and that became God to me, and I don't know how it happened. You know, some of you that have struggled with this, the God, finding a God of your understanding may have had some kind of trauma, too. I found that I had, and that had nothing to do with God. It had to do with denominational politics and people and whatever, but that wasn't God. But I didn't know that. I thought God just didn't want me. I'd spent 7 years of higher education to become a minister, and I couldn't find a job. I ended up working at the denominational headquarters in Atlanta for a while, and I was promoting Baptist colleges and the Baptist student unions, and I created a historical museum, and I was proud of my job. And they called me in one day, and my boss was sobbing when I walked in the door. And he said, "I don't want to do this, but I've been told I have to tell you that you're going to have to leave, and we're going to give you 6 months before you have to leave, so you can find something else, but you're going to have to leave here." And that was the week that I ran back into Dick in Atlanta. So I didn't think anybody ever actually used that line. I was pretty cynical by then. So we started going out. Things were going as they were at church. I ended up going to work for Dick's company. And one of the things that I realized, you know, worked for him for a while, and I had this idea that I was going to save his business, and then I really would be, because they were having some cash flow issues. And so it was about that time in life where you get all those credit card applications. So I'd pay the company's bills with my credit cards, and the next month I'd pay that bill with another credit card and the company's bills. And we were going to stabilize, and I was really be part owner of the company because I was doing this. Well, I mounted up to about $25,000 worth of my own personal debt. And I don't even know if I told him about it. I just, it was just, I was going to save save the situation. And I was mad at him. He didn't ask me to do it. He was on that list. But I, recognize that eventually is one thing I need to look at. It was really a crazy time. So anyway, I kind of bounced around for a minute here. So I'm back to second and third step stuff. There was a time, actually it was the same weekend that I had spoken at the Al-Anon Assembly. That next week I got home and I wasn't even sure we had enough money for food. The company was struggling, and a lot of it was technology was coming on board, and Dick had been doing these large multi-slide projector shows that people could do on a computer now or whatever, and so anyway, I got down on my knees, and I said, God, I don't know if you hear me, but I need help, and I don't know how to ask for help. And our dog, Booger Bear, liked to pray with me. He would put his nose on the bed and whenever I prayed, and he was there too. And if you've ever looked at the word dog in the mirror, it's got, I learned a lot about unconditional love for my dog. Well, about 2 hours later, there was a knock on my front door, and I went to the door, and there was a friend of mine I hadn't seen in several months, and she just said, I had a feeling you needed these. And she was standing there with 8 bags of groceries. Now, Moses had a burning bush, and Bill Wilson had his bright light, and Barbara Anderson had 8 bags of groceries. It was every bit of a miracle to me that this would happen. And I finally took the second and third step that day. That's what it was. Now, everybody doesn't get a gift like that, but I did. I needed it. So, I'm just going to kind of jump around to some things. Starting to look at myself, I had so much fear that I had in my life. And when we were early married, we had this little mouse in our house, and I was terrified of the mouse, and I made Dick get rid of it. And then our office building became infested with mice. And so I just told I was supposed to be the business manager. I told him I had some things that I needed to work in quiet. I was going to work at home for a few days, while the poison took place. And because I was terrified. And I had a phone call one day from one of the employees, and she was screaming because there was a mouse running up the phone cord while we were talking. And, but, the mice were gone eventually and gotten rid of, and I didn't have to go over there. Well, we moved out to the country and to what we called the fishing camp house, and not like your fishing camp, at least did have windows and doors and all that, but it was, we were saying, it had once been a taxidermy place. So we were, one day I screamed bloody murder, and I told Dick I had seen a rat, and he said, oh, I'm sure it was just a big mouse. I said, no, this was a rat. And so the next morning, I had a note that had been slid under the bathroom, underneath the bedroom door, and it said, don't come out, I have Mickey cornered. And just a few minutes later, Dick came into the bedroom, and he had on his bathrobe and his army boots, and he had a crowbar in one hand, and he had his 9mm in the other, and his hair was kind of sticking out, kind of like Bozo the Clown, and he had been up all night doing war with the rats. And there actually ended up being 7 of them, I think. And my sponsor actually gave me permission to move out for a couple days. But I'm not scared of mice anymore. We actually had the house we're in now in Kentucky had mice a couple years ago, and I managed to stay and not run away, and was grateful when they were gone. But I didn't panic. Fears are crazy. My dad had so many fears that he passed on to me. He told me that if you go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, you have to turn the light on because there could be an animal in the toilet. Well, he lived on a farm with an outhouse, His reality was different than mine. If you're looking at your fears, look at what the reality of them are. Sometimes they just have no reality at all. Anyway, I also was looking how I had been trying to help Dick with things. We had been married for a while, and I just couldn't get over and he was 34 when we got married and had never been married before. I just could not get over the fact he didn't respect me enough to put the toilet seat down. And I think the third time I had fallen in the middle of the night. I told my sponsor about how much it was bothering me. She said, "Okay, I want you to try something." I said, "What?" She said, "No, you have to agree to this before I tell you what it is." Has your sponsor ever done this to you? It's irritating. Anyway, I said, "Okay," and she said, "If you don't agree to do it, you can't call me about this ever again." So I said, "Okay, what do you want me to do?" She said, "I want you to put the seat back up for him." I said, "You want me to do what?" And she said, "I want you to put the seat back up for him." "Why does he have to put it down for you? Why can't you put it up for him?" I said, "Are you kidding?" She said, "No, I want you to try it." So, and I don't want to cause any arguments out there. This is my experience, strength and hope. It doesn't have to be what y'all do. So anyway, the first time I did it, I kind of threw the toilet seat back up, and I almost cracked the back of the tank. It was so hard. I was so irritated. But, it started getting funny because, after about 5 or 6 days, he hadn't said anything. And so, I'd come out of the bathroom kind of giggling, and I don't know what he thought. Eventually he said, I think it was almost at the 2-week point, he said, "Have you developed some kind of new, unusual bathroom habit?" And I said, "No, honey, I'm just putting the seat back up for you." And, it's never been important again. The things that people, get irritated about, the toothpaste tube or the toilet seat or whatever, I can look. Now, I will tell you that eventually it probably wasn't a bad idea that I did turn the light on in the middle of the night, because one of the places we lived in, that we were renting this house, there was a snake in the bathroom in the middle of the night, and I won't tell you all of that story, but it got rid of the snake. Anyway, so I worked through the second and third step, start and work through but I still really wasn't sure what I was going to do when I grew up. There was this whole question out there. I'd been working for Dick, but he really didn't need me to work for him. He was doing mostly independent stuff without a big company anymore. And so my first position of service in Georgia was, at that point anyway, the Al-Anon World Service Office was sending their booth to Atlanta a lot to set up at professional conferences. And I was assigned to be the one to set it up and to get people to man it. And I don't know how many, I think I did it for at least 12 conferences. And after the first one, I realized these topics were fascinating to me. And a lot of them were about alcoholism. Some of them were about mental health. So I eventually would try to get, at least during the conferences I'd want to, I'd try to get people to staff the booth during the things that I wanted to go to. Well, one particular conference I was sitting at the booth, and a friend of mine from Al-Anon was sitting at the booth next to me, and he said, "You have a seminary degree, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Would you like to be a chaplain at a women's halfway house?" And that's how I got my first job in treatment. Now, I've done a bunch of different things since then. I ended up, eventually working, got certified in addiction counseling, did that for a while, eventually ended up on the business development side because we needed to make more money, and I was traveling the country. And then it came to a time, and so I'm just sharing this. Y'all can pray for me. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do next. I can't work in a field that is killing people. And I won't get into much more than that, but they're not teaching the steps anymore, and they're just giving drugs as an option, and we're going to have to do some more 12-step work. Family members aren't hearing about Al-Anon anymore, so if you wonder why there's not a lot of young people coming into your groups, that's why. Okay, I'm off my soapbox. But I was grateful for the time that I was able to help people. I actually saw somebody that remembered me from those days that's here at the conference this week. So God gave me a purpose that I didn't know. I had no idea why I went to seminary. God knew. I just had to give the time to do it. My parents, when I started to think about making amends to them, well, first of all, I made amends to my grandmother. She had passed by then, and I wrote her a letter, and I went to her grave, and I took a camellia bush, which was her favorite flower, And I read the letter there. I took a Al-Anon friend with me, and I dug the hole and planted the bush and tore up the letter in little pieces and planted it with it. And I didn't get to go see the camellias bloom this year, but I try to do that as often as I can. Next year I'm going to send a sponsee if I'm not around Decatur. But it was a way to let go of something. Sometimes something symbolic, if somebody's past helps. With my parents, I just started to try to make them part of our life. Dick and I, if we were going off to speak somewhere, I'd tell them where we were going to go, and I'd give them a phone number. I'd call them when I got there, and they probably didn't care. I mean, but they appreciate hearing from us, So I just made them part. I'd call my mom, most every day after work just to check in on her. And, there was days I really didn't want to hear what she was fixing for dinner, but she loved hearing from me. And, I started to find out some of the things that were in her background that I didn't know about. She had been married before she married my dad. And she married a man she met on a train, and he was divorced and had 3 kids, and they got married, and about 6 months later he decided he wanted to go back to his first wife, and he left her, and I had no idea. And he was alcoholic, so actually, she told me about her story about that. My mother had to say, every time I'd call her, I'd say, "How you doing?" And she said, "I'm just keep it on. And I hated it, but that was her slogan. That was her one day at a time, or, let go and let God. Keeping on was just what she did, and she stayed in the day and went along. And my mom and dad got a little bit better through osmosis. I got to, Dick and I threw them a big 50th anniversary party, and we invited all their friends and had a big celebration, and they started having trouble with their house, and so we arranged, we wanted to find a place we would be willing to live in. We found a senior apartment that we could move them into, that they had some care there, and it was a continuous care community. They could, if they had more problems, they could move on to another part of it. And we got them new furniture and put pictures all over the room. And it took us a little while to convince them they needed to go there, but they were falling all the time. And anyway, and it was pretty close. I could go by there on the way home from work. Well, we moved him in August, and in January, I had a call that my dad had been found non-responsive and rushed to the hospital, and he didn't make it. And Dick had been, the night before, he had been scheduled to speak in Colorado, I think it was, and the plane didn't take off and for like 3 or 4 hours, and they brought it back in and deplaned it, and so he ended up being there with me, which I'm very grateful. We had a wonderful funeral service for my dad, and my mom and I actually had fun that day. She hadn't put up makeup on in years, so I helped her fix herself up and fixed her hair, and she got to see all of her best friends, and her family had all come in, and the next day Dick and I saw her, and we were headed off to a convention just to kind of recover ourselves, and I brought her a puppy. We had a puppy at the time, and probably my favorite picture of my mom is that day, my puppy licking her face because she was giggling, and my mom didn't giggle much. She was pretty stoic. So we went off to, it actually ended up being the Hilton Head Roundup, and we had a nice weekend there, and we decided to stay every day. And on Monday, we were sitting down on the dock eating shrimp, and I had a phone call that my mom had been found non-responsive, and they'd been able to revive her, but they weren't sure how long it would last. We better get there if I wanted to see her. So we got in the car, we started speeding home, and Dick got pulled over by the police. I think because God wanted me to have somebody else to be mad at, and it's because he was pretty mad about the ticket for the rest of the way. And somewhere along the line, we stopped at this Wendy's, and because I had to go to the bathroom, and on the music in the Wendy's, it was playing How Great Thou Art, and I've never heard Christian music in a Wendy's before. And I was actually in the bathroom, there was somebody in the next stall. I said, "Was that How Great Thou Art?" And she said, "It was. I've never heard of him in a Wendy's." And we had just sung it at my dad's service. So one of those God moments. I just knew that somehow or other God was going to be with me to help me get through this. We got back, and I was holding one hand, and Dick was holding the other hand, and we were saying the Lord's Prayer in the middle of Thou Will Be Done. She passed. And I had heard people talk about being with their parent when they passed. I never thought I wanted that gift, but the woman that brought me into the world, I was able to be there with her when she left the world, and it was a beautiful gift. I'm glad I had that. But it was 10 days after my dad died. It was a lot. And shortly before that, we had lost a Booger Bear. And Booger Bear was 18 when he died, and Booger Bear was probably, some of y'all may have met him. He went to probably more conferences than most of you have, and he loved going with us. And we thought, we have told each other the day that he died that we weren't sure we would cry more for each other, whichever one passed first, because we had a hard time losing Booger Bear. But he taught us how to grieve, and he got me ready to lose my mom and dad. And not very long after that, Dick got diagnosed with esophageal cancer. And because we had all this loss, he didn't tell me right away. He held on to it for a while. He was determined to find the answer before he told me. And he didn't tell many people, because y'all don't gossip or anything. So, anyway, I didn't know what was going on, knew something was. I remember one day I was just wanting to know my mom and dad were together. I was out on my back porch, and I just said, God, I wish there was some way you could let me know that they were together. And just, a minute later, a shooting star went across the sky. And I just had this image of my parents riding the shooting star. And it was during that time that I went back to that God journal, and I started writing down every day some gift from God every day. And there was so much going on, so much had happened, that I don't know that I would have made it through it otherwise. And we were living on a little lake, and there was this blue heron that seemed to show up every day. And I'm part Cherokee, so blue heron is symbolic of the peace of God, and so this heron would show up. Dick finally told me. He gave me very little notice. He said, "We're going to Rochester, New York, for my surgery. I have esophageal cancer, and they're going to take it all out. You don't need to worry." And he didn't tell me all of what we were going through. And so we headed up to Yankee Land, and if I'm from Atlanta. I did not want to lose my husband in Yankee Land, but I had been delegate by then, and Dick was a current delegate, and we called people, and we said we're going to be up there. And when we got to the hotel where I was going to be staying throughout that whole period, there were 24 people from AA and Al-Anon in the parking lot there to greet us. And so if you've not really, I think we probably have all experienced the Worldwide Fellowship more in the last 2 years through Zoom. But up until that time, I didn't have a clue. But we had this new family that we hadn't met yet that were there to help us through stuff. And the next day, we went into the chapel there to pray, and some of this I'll let Dick share, but because it's part of his story too. But we had this peace that we're in the right place. Dick had a surgery. It was 15 hours long. And they called me every hour, but at one point I was just having trouble, and I looked to see if there was a meeting in Rochester during the day. And sure enough, there was one. And it happened to be on Wednesday, which was the day of his surgery, and it was right across from the hospital. So I walked across the street and went to an Al-Anon meeting during the middle of his surgery. And I met several people there. Actually, I went up there and spoke in Rochester 2 or 3 years ago, and several of the people remembered me coming in that day. But anyway, they told me he had made it through surgery. He might be in ICU a week or longer. They didn't know. And the next morning, I went into ICU to see him, and he couldn't talk very well, but I could hear him say, "Could you close the curtain so I could watch the TV?" And I figured he was going to live. And so they moved him down to a step below ICU. I don't remember what it was called. The first day the physical therapist came in, she wanted him to stand up and walk to the end of the bed. Well, he stood up and lapped the nurse's station about 4 times. He was just determined that he wanted to live. And, we had this whole staff. It was a teaching hospital, which was part of the reason this all happened so quick. And they would do grand rounds, and they'd come to see him. And, occasionally we'd hear somebody say, because we had cards all over the place and flowers all over the place from people. We had visitors all the time, and somebody said, "Aren't they from Atlanta? How does he know so many people?" And Dick just said, "Who is he?" The last statement was, "Who is he?" And Dick said, "I'm just a drunk." And so, and I went on to tell him, a little bit about how the program was there for us, and it was. And Dick got out. We had probably the weirdest time in our marriage was I had just started menopause, and he was freezing all the time from, having gotten out of surgery. And so I decided I could just survive the sauna for a few weeks. And we stayed up there for a month or so until he was stabilized enough to leave. And sure enough, shortly after that, his mother died. We had so much loss, he could not work for a while. He was on a feeding tube. That his business, we lost his business, we lost a house, we lost our stuff. Things just started going away. And, stuff just wasn't important anymore. God gave us each other and took him through this, gave us this miracle to save his life. Very few people survive esophageal cancer. If you have a loved one, that actually, and I don't know, but we've heard from lots of people in the program all over the country since he had cancer that have called us. We'd be glad to help you, but, please don't stay in your little small town because you don't want to move, because you need somebody who's an expert. And Dick anybody who has gone where he went is alive today, and most of the rest of them are not. But Dick's been the esophageal cancer survivor sponsor for a number of people since that time. Things of financial struggles are financial struggles, but I could tell you that my faith in God giving me what I needed one day at a time has grown and grown. I don't always see where the answer's coming from, but they always do. We always have what we need. We've always had a roof over our head. We've always had food on the table. We didn't take we gave the peanut butter away because we got some from a food bank actually this year, and we got about that amount of peanut butter at home because Dick can't eat it. So I like peanut butter, but there's a lot of peanut butter that goes a long way. So anyway, but I can tell you that living life anticipating God's gift in the day is a whole lot better than living life in fear of how you're going to get through. I think God's miracles were always there for me. I just never saw them, or I never called them that, They're always there. Some of them have been very huge, and some of them have been small. But they have taken us through. And part of the reason we moved to Kentucky is it's cheaper to live there. Dick's from there, and he certainly needed to be there during the COVID time. Dick was in the hospital very shortly after COVID struck. It was not COVID. He wasn't sure at the time, but he was in the hospital about a month, and I could not go see him. Again, they told him he might not make it through it. That was the third time he's had that kind of surgery when they told him he may or may not live. And his sister lived there at the time. She's since moved, which is odd, but they want him to move to a rehab hospital, and that's where all the COVID was in Louisville, and we didn't want to put him there. So she said, bring him to my house, I'll take care of him. And so his sister was there to take care of him when he got out of the hospital. And so he had, if that was the only reason we moved to Louisville, for him to be there, it's a long story, but he had strep in his abdomen from the mesh that they had those commercials about all the time that was in his belly. And he made it through it again. Dick is officially a cat. You know, I don't know how many lives he has left. I've tried to calculate. I think he has 3 more. So, but he made it through it. I am so grateful for this fellowship. You know, I know a lot of people have struggled in the last couple of years, but I can tell you that by living life based in gratitude, by living life looking for God's gift in the day, I've had an amazing time. I've spoken all over the world. I spoke at a meeting where people from Russia and Kiev, and, you know, I mean, there were people from all over in that conflict. Both sides of it were in this meeting that I led. I have spoken in Israel. I've spoken in England. I've spoken in Australia. Some people hate Zoom, but it has certainly woken up the idea of a worldwide fellowship to me in a way I never expected. And I get to be in a meeting every week with my sponsor. And she does not live in my town, so it's been a special gift to be able to do that. I know that God has a reason for us to be here, and I'm very grateful that I was able to share a little bit of the miracles that have happened in my life. One last thing. I had a host in West Virginia a number of years ago that called me, and he wanted me to go do communion with his brother, who was at Shepherd Spinal Center. I said, Booth, I'm not ordained. He said, I don't care. Go get some bread and some grape juice and go see my brother. So I did, you know, and he said, and by the way, why aren't you? Somebody will ordain you. I dare you. And so I am now a ordained minister through a non-denominational church, and I didn't know why I did that. I've done a number of funerals. In the last couple of years, I've done a number of Zoom memorials, which I never quite imagined officiating. I haven't found the right inlet to do a lot in Louisville, but before I moved from Georgia, I probably led over 200 weddings I was one of the justices of the peace or whatever, not officially a judge, doing weddings in Douglas County, and you name it, I married them. People that bounced out of the bed and decided maybe they should get married because they'd been in bed with each other. Had probably a shotgun wedding. There were about 12 people there to witness it, and a very pregnant 16-year-old and a guy who was marrying her. I did the first gay wedding in Douglas County. You know, it was a real gift to do that, and I know that there was a reason for me to be ordained as well. And I thank y'all for all the love that you share with us thus far, and just know that we love and care about you. Thank you.